I would like to acknowledge that this video is being filmed on the traditional lands of the Wurrundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or First Nations people who may be watching this video today. Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a books beside my bed video for you where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. This is my reading wrap up from the 30th of July until the 5th of August. I read a total of 7 things this week, including a reread, which I'm not going to talk about in too much depth in here because I'm going to have a completely standalone video coming out for that. I read a total of 2,108 pages and my yearly reading total is 365 books. So my reread for this week was Storm Echo by Nalini Singh. I reread it because I was filming my Storm Echo review and recap video that goes along with the rest of my Side Changeling series, which will be linked on the screen. I have yet to start tackling editing that video, but it is going to come out this week. Hopefully it will be the next video. I had a very interesting week last week, so things did not quite go as planned in terms of my editing and uploading schedule, but I was really pleased to go back and reread it and to sort of wrap my head around a lot of those things that I'd been thinking about the first time that I had read through it. It is the most recent book in the Side Changeling series. I've talked about it in a Books Beside My Bed video already, and there'll be a separate video coming, so we're going to move on from that one now. The second book that I read this week was Upside Down by N.R. Walker, and this was truly just a delight to read. It honestly just made me feel warm and fuzzy inside after I read it. It is an Australian contemporary MM romance. Both heroes in this book are asexual, and this book really explores their relationship dynamic. One of the characters is very confident in their asexuality and the other is just starting to figure it out and is not quite sure that they want to add yet another label to themselves. So it is the story of Jordan, who is a librarian, and he's the one who's, thinking about all of his labels, and he is convinced by one of his good friends to go to a support group that focuses on asexuality, and there he meets Hennessy. But this is not actually the first time that he has come across Hennessy, and that's because every day Jordan sees Hennessy on the bus, and he's had this huge crush on this guy. He's attractive, and they only spot each other, for 5 minutes of a bus trip, and yet he's never worked up the courage to say hi. And then he meets him in this group, and the two strike up a friendship and then a relationship, and it was honestly just really, really lovely as these characters explore their relationship. And the side characters are amazing in this book. Honestly, it was so much fun, and there is a group of people who are regularly on the same bus as Jordan and Hennessy, and they become so invested in this relationship and they start commenting on it and giving each of them advice on what to do next in the relationship. And then outside of that, this group of people also become friends themselves and start exchanging soup recipes and things like that. And it is honestly just adorable. It is set in New South Wales, which is the state north of me. It was just such a feel-good read, and I'm so glad I finally picked it up because I have been sleeping on this book, clearly. And then I read another Australian romance series. This is a romantic suspense series, and it's a trilogy. So it is the Island Bound trilogy by Suzanne Cass. The first book is Bound by Truth, the second book is Bound by Silence, and the third book is Bound by the Stars. And it follows a set of siblings, so 2 sisters and a brother. So one book is set in Australia, one is set in Hawaii, and the other is set in the US Virgin Islands, but the siblings are Australian. Okay, so in Bound by Truth you have Sierra. She is a former investigative journalist, and she kind of has moved away from that a little bit, and she now lives on Kangaroo Island, which is part of South Australia. And she moved there after a car accident really left her with a lot of trauma. There was some significant events that happened in that car crash. And so she's moved to this island. She's living a very quiet life. She also moved there because she had a stalker from a case that she was investigating years earlier. And then one day a young girl goes missing on the island, and it's feared that she has been kidnapped. And Sierra becomes involved in the case and spends a lot of time with the new local cop, Reed, who she's met a couple of times in passing. And the two have this instant chemistry and they get along great. But what they don't realize is that they have more in common in their past than they thought possible, and that their paths have crossed before now, and that secret could potentially blow up their relationship. I will say content warnings in this book. You have death of a spouse by suspected suicide. You have death of children. There's the kidnapping of children by a suspected pedophile. The bones of a child are found as a result of this particular case. So there's a lot of things going on in here. It is romantic suspense. I should say this series is not as open door as I would have thought it would have been, but it also didn't bother me in context with the story because it was definitely about the emotional connection between these characters than anything else. Bound by Silence is the second book in the series. It follows Kira, who is Sierra's older sister. She has been married and living in Hawaii for 10 years, and at the very start of the book there has been a recent eruption and there is a lava flow heading towards her house, but at the same time her husband is confronted by members of the Yakuza and is killed in front of her, and she ends up going on the run because the Yakuza are after her. Her house is taken by the natural disaster and she ends up camping out in this shed that belongs to Dalton, who is a local bounty hunter living on the island. What Kira doesn't know at the time is that she has been framed for murder by the Yakuza because they're trying to track her down, and Dalton sees the report and, being a bounty hunter, is very tempted to turn her in and initially goes to do that, but then they're both attacked and he begins to suspect that maybe her story is not as far-fetched as he first thought. And this one does have content warnings for sexual assault for an emotionally abusive domestic partner and the associated violence and kidnapping that comes with a story like this. And then finally, Bound by the Stars follows Kira and Sierra's younger brother Logan, who basically escaped Australia. He ended up engaged to a woman in, I want to say Mexico, but I can't remember exactly where she was. But then something happened and he found out something about her family, and so he left. He ended up purchasing a boat and he spent the last couple of years traveling around the Caribbean, and at the start of the book we find out he is in the US Virgin Islands. He has this chance encounter with Mia, who is a local exotic dancer, and she ended up on the island because she was looking for her sister and found her in a precarious situation, and so traded her own freedom as such by working for this gangster as a dancer. And they have this chance meeting and then he invites her out to dinner, and they go out to dinner, but then both of them are attacked. And because both of them kind of have these histories that they haven't shared with each other, both of them think that the attack was directed at them specifically. They have to try and figure out what is going on. And in the middle of all of this, Sierra, Reed, Kira and Dalton turn up looking for Logan because I haven't heard from him in 2 years. And so everyone gets caught up in sort of what is going on. And there was a lot happening, to be honest. But I still really enjoyed it. I actually really enjoyed all of these characters and the different settings that they all seem to be in. This one does have content warnings for people trafficking, history of drug use, murder, and general violence. All right, so that's it with that series. And then I picked up a non-romance book. This is Cobalt Blue by Matthew Riley. This is his most recent release. It's actually relatively short for him. And this is a superhero action story. Now, whenever I talk about Matthew Riley, I preface his books by saying that they are action movies in a book. If you're looking for in-depth plot and characterization, you're probably not going to get them. And as long as you know that going into it, you can probably enjoy the story. He also does stereotype a lot, and I've been reading him for years, and I really enjoy his books because I don't think anyone writes action the way that Matthew Riley does. That said, his work is not always unproblematic, and I suspect it is the case in here, and I probably need a little bit more time to unpack some of my feelings around some of the things in the book. But there were things that I also really liked. First of all, it's a superhero book. And in this story, there was a joint US-Russia mission to send a probe to Venus. And the probe came back, and the two people who were sent to investigate it were an American scientist and a Russian military leader. And the two stumble on it, and then they both end up with a face full of Venusian dust and microbes. And something in that mix gives them superhuman abilities. And so you have one superhero for America and one superhero for Russia, and of course that basically sets off another war. At the very beginning of this book, we find out that America's superhero has just died. The thing that I really loved about this book that we don't quite find out at the start of the book is, so I'm going to put spoilers on the screen because I think I have to talk about the spoilers to talk about the parts that I really loved. Spoiler tag will be here. Skip it if you don't want to know. America's superhero was a 40-year-old woman. Honestly, she sounds totally awesome. Not only that, she was a scientist. She was not military, she was not anything like that. And I think that that was a great choice. I wish we had done more with that, to be honest. But this story is actually not about her because she dies at the start of the book, and we don't even really get to meet her except through some flashbacks. We see the entire story through the eyes of her natural born daughter, because what America did was they basically, they wanted to create more superheroes, and so they harvested her eggs with her permission and used donors and surrogates to carry 7 children to term. So she has technically 8 children, 1 natural born and 7 that were carried by surrogates. And all of them developed powers of some kind, not exactly the same as hers and also not at the same strength as her. But the entire story is told through the eyes of Cobalt Blue, or the youngest daughter, who basically went into hiding. So she's in the WITSEC program because her siblings and her mother were uber famous. And also because the hero of Russia was much younger, and his goal is basically to create a race of superhuman children with his genes and take over the world. So as soon as Cobalt dies, he basically comes to America and he starts violently killing all of her children in an effort to track down Cobalt Blue, because he wants to kidnap her because she is the only natural born child, and he thinks that if he takes her and he forces her to have children, that their children will be super powerful, just like the original superheroes. So like I said, I'm not unaware of the problematic nature of this, but if in terms of coming up with a concept for superheroes, it felt very interesting, and like it reminded me a lot of The Boys. Not that I've seen all of The Boys through, I've seen most of the first season, I think, but it had that sort of feel to it because it is super, super violent. Like, it's very graphic, so be aware of that going into it. I enjoyed it for what it was, and it was entertaining, and I basically sped through it. That's the thing about Matthew Riley's books. Once you start, it's very, very hard to put them down because of the way that he writes. He doesn't have a lot of natural breaks where you can actually stop, which I appreciate. All right, and then the final book that I read was Husband Material by Alexis Hall. This is the second book in the London Calling series and the sequel to Boyfriend Material, and I have been buddy reading this with Brie. I only just finished this last night, so I haven't fully processed my thoughts on it because as I said, I had a really big week. And so the thought process stage is sort of still happening. But we are back with Luke and Oliver. It is 2 years later. They are still in their relationship. They are still navigating a whole lot of things and learning a lot about one another. And then all of their friends are getting married around them. And Luke begins to feel the pressure that like he has to get married because that's the thing that you do if you're in a relationship. So Luke and Oliver go to 3 weddings, and each one is very, very different. And each one causes them to confront something in their relationship. The thing that I really appreciate about this book is that Alexis Hall doesn't shy away from showing that these two disagree on things and that they have to figure out a way to come back from those disagreements and those arguments. Like, they're a couple, they don't know absolutely everything about each other yet because, as Brie pointed out in one of her voice messages, they are still very new in this relationship. They have not spent that much time together, and they are very different people. So they bring different experiences, and they also have had very interesting upbringings as well, and different levels of support from their family members. Luke's mum at one point comments on the fact that Oliver is just as messy as Luke is, and it's really, really true, because despite the fact that he comes across as being the more mature, the one with the serious job, he's a barrister, and he's got all of that going for him, there are still parts of his life that are messy, and he's still learning how to deal with that. But yes, they navigate these weddings, an engagement, wedding planning, which honestly, is incredibly stressful for them. And then there is also a funeral. This book is basically a riff on 4 weddings and a funeral. And none of it is simple and none of it is easy, and I loved it. It explores a lot of the things that we don't often get to see in a romance book, where you go from meet cute to relationship to some kind of third act conflict to HEA or HFN, and you don't go further than that. This book is an exploration of relationships, and as I've said, I'll read anything that Alexis Hall writes, but this just felt like a really great character study of these 2 characters and the world they live in and how that impacts them as people. Hi guys, Editing Steph here, and I realised there was something I didn't include in this clip, and it was actually another conversation that I had with Brie, in that another thing that was really remarkable about this book is that this book is a closed door, and you almost don't realise that it is. Now, I picked up on it about halfway through the book because I thought it was a bit strange that we hadn't had anything happen yet, and I'm so used to Alexis Hall's books, but it actually doesn't matter in this particular story, and I know that for a lot of people that is a massive turnoff, but it actually didn't need it in this story, and it didn't detract from what was going on. So just be aware of that going into it, but I just thought I would mention it because we were talking about it and Brie hadn't even realised. It was just one of those weird situations where I got to the end of the book and I'm like, huh, and then moved on with my life. So as I said, I loved the fact that we explored different types of weddings, from a really flamboyant, out there queer wedding to a really super serious, high society, fancy wedding, and everything in between. I love that they do have arguments on page and they have to figure out how to work with each other. I mean, that is so important. I love that there is no breakup. Like, that just going into this book knowing, and because I'd read Alexis Hall talking about it, that the books in this series, the conflict is never going to be about them breaking up. That was important to me, knowing that going into this book. It just felt so hilarious and heartfelt and honest. And like, what more can you ask for in a book? Also, as always, all the side characters are utterly hilarious and enjoyable. And one of the characters who's introduced into this book is going to be getting his own book in the series, and I'm very much looking forward to that. All right, so those are the books that I have read this week. In the comments, let me know if you have read any of them or if you're planning on picking any of them up. Otherwise, feel free to leave me a ring emoji down below. I hope that wherever you're in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, everyone.